Rick, it's great to have you back with us on Capital and Power. And I just got to ask you, at this point, it's January 2026. What is your overall feeling about the state of affairs economically and from an investment standpoint? Because I love that you said earlier that you're buying the commodity everyone hates, but we'll get to that in a minute.
Well, my mentor, Peter Cundall, wrote a famous book that said that there's always something to do. Meaning, in any circumstance, there are ways to lose money and there are ways to make money. It's preferable that one makes money. And this circumstance is no different. In some senses, my life has become more challenging. 2021, 2022, I'm a self-described contrarian. There was a lot of hate in my market, so there was a lot of stuff to buy. Now, there's much less hate in the market. There are points in time in your life when you write checks, which is to say that when your discipline is hated, and there are points in time in your life when you cash checks, which is to say when you're loved. You can't cash checks if you don't write checks. So you need to do both. I know I'm doing the right thing, Adam, because I'm attracting a lot of hate on social media. And I know that when I'm hated, I'm doing something right. I just last week sold some physical silver. The silver, of course, is on a real tear, which is why I sold it. The fact that the price is up justified the narrative. The people that didn't have the courage to buy the narrative before the price went up, for some reason, think I'm crazy for having done so. The silver, well, first of all, the price of a commodity that doubles in short order is, I would suspect, arithmetically half as attractive as it was before the price doubled. That's just simple math. I bought silver because it was hated, and I bought silver because I believed that it was more likely than not that it would increase in price up to, say, $50. I was wrong. It increased to 75. Suffice it to say, enough is enough. Do I think it's going to go up from here? Absolutely. Do I care? Not a whit.
Can I interrupt you?
Yeah, of course.
Because there's that great joke or expression, I don't know if it's true, but they asked the millionaire, how did you become rich? And the response was, I took my profits too soon.
I think that's a wonderful crack. I used a different quote, Bernard Baruch's, when they talked to him about that. He said, the only guy that bought at the bottom and sold at the top was a liar. It didn't happen. You make your money by taking a fat slug out of the middle. And that's what I've tried mostly successfully to do.
Well, because you're talking about silver. So you recently on a podcast, you said that we are in the midst of a precious metals bull market, similar to the 1970s. And I want you to explain that. But then you went on to say that we're 2 years out from a raging commodities bull market. So share your insight with us.
I think they're different things. I think that they act similarly and sometimes they overlie. And this one will. But I think they're different circumstances. The gold bull market is partially a monetary bull market. Gold has done well in the course of history. If you study the Shapiro family history, you'll know what I'm talking about. Gold does well when people are concerned about the maintenance of purchasing power in fiat-denominated savings instruments. And people are and have a right to be concerned about that. We can go to the arithmetic of America if you want to. But suffice it to say, the debt and deficit in the United States and other Western nations, including entitlement debt and deficits, I would suspect makes it almost impossible that the U.S. dollar does not lose 75% of its purchasing power over 10 years. We did that before in the decade of the 1970s, and you may remember the impact that had on gold and silver prices. But in particular, it's negative real interest rates that matter. If you believe that the deterioration of the purchasing power of the United States dollar is measured by the CPI, you're happy. I don't believe that. The CPI, when it's inconvenient, doesn't include fruit or fuel. And no index that leaves out lunch is of any use to me. In addition, the CPI doesn't include tax. If my cost of living didn't include tax, I wouldn't bitch so much about the index. But my belief is the basket of services that I use, and by the way, Adam, you use, means that the real purchasing power of the US dollar is declining by more like 8% compounded. There's the rub. If you're getting paid 4.2 and you're losing 8, you're not making anything. You're losing 3.8. So if gold moves because people are concerned about the deterioration of their purchasing power in fiat currencies, uh, it comes with a government guarantee. Uh, the raw materials bull market is very different. It's impacted really by supply and demand and utility. Gold's principal utility is as a form of wealth and a medium of exchange. But I would suggest that for fully 3 decades, we have underinvested in the productive capabilities around natural resources. And we can't cure 3 decades of sin in 5 years of investment. That doesn't work that way. At the same time, there's 8 billion of us on Earth, and the living standards, particularly of the poor, have, despite rumors to the contrary, been increasing substantially. In 40 years, we have taken the number of people who live in dire poverty down by 2 billion people. They're merely poor, which is a good thing. And as poor people get more purchasing power, the stuff that they consume is stuff that's made of stuff. When you get more money, you take a trip to China or you buy some little gizmo, from Apple, which is all intellectual capital and no physical capital. When a poor person gets more money, they go from barefoot to tennis shoes to a bicycle, from there to a Toyota Hilux. They go from a thatch roof to a steel roof, stuff that's made of stuff. And so 2 things are happening in raw materials. One, there are more of us and we're becoming wealthier, hence our material consumption is increasing. At the same time that 3 decades of underinvestment in natural resource extractive capacity is constraining supply. That doesn't reach ahead, I would suspect, for 2 years. When it does, I think it'll be as dramatic as it was in 2001, 2002, when China came of age, or in the middle part of the decade of the 1970s.
So I want to talk about this. You said in our last discussion 6 months ago, CPI is a lie. You called it CP lie, and that got a lot of reaction. You've talked about there's no appetite in the United States to reduce the size of government, and that was also along the lines of the devaluation of the dollar. You also, at the beginning of this discussion, talked about selling silver. You also, in the previous podcast, mentioned that you still believe the price of gold will hold, and while there'll be some ups and downs, you still see the trajectory going up. I'm a Luddite. I'm very conservative, I would say politically as well as when I invest. But my whole strategy, because I'm a child of the 70s, I was a very young boy, my experience is move money out of equities into U.S. Treasuries. But what I'm hearing you tell me is, no, Adam, that is not the way to go. Am I correct? Should I be looking at gold? Or even you're looking at oil. Should I be looking at oil, the thing everyone, quote, hates?
You absolutely should be looking at oil. They can't tell you whether U.S. equities are overpriced or underpriced. I know the natural resources business, and I also know the conventional financial services business. Well, I know how to value a bank or an insurance company. I know how to value an oil company or a mining company. I don't know how to value NVIDIA because I don't know how to pronounce it. So I don't want to say to you that the U.S. equities market as a whole is overvalued or undervalued because I don't know. What I do know is that putting your money into long-term treasuries in a market like this is what Franz Pick described as investing in certificates of guaranteed confiscation. Let's look at the arithmetic of a 30-year treasury, or pardon me, a 10-year treasury. You tie up your dough for 10 years. Right now, the U.S. government pays you 4.2. They pay you 4.2 in a currency that's losing value at 8. So you're losing 3.8. That's 3.8 a year compounded for 10 years. That means, Adam, that you give the government $100,000 and they give you back $50,000 worth of purchasing power. Except that $50,000 won't be worth $50,000 because the purchasing power is experiencing compound depreciation. Many people don't know, and you were too young to understand, that in the decade 1970 to 1980, according to the then Office of Management and Budget, the US dollar lost 75% of its purchasing power in 10 years, meaning that it took $4,000 in 1980 to buy what $1,000 would buy in 1970. Imagine yourself as a person on fixed income trying to live on savings. Savings that you had determined in 1970 were sufficient to afford you a reasonable standard of living in 1980. A very unpleasant circumstance, and one that I'm certain, frankly, that we're doomed to repeat.
You've just pointed out I'm standing on the stern of the Titanic in my strategies. I did not do 10 years. I can assure you of that. I did very short term when I moved. But let me ask you, it's not about me. I want to talk about where we're all heading. And when you talk about oil, I love V8 engines. I am a big proponent of gasoline-powered and carbon-powered energy. However, I'm also a proponent of renewable. If renewable can become cheap enough to surpass carbon, why not? But the reason I bring it up is I'm in China right now conducting this, and I'm blown away by what I'm seeing. 38% of the electricity here is generated by renewable, and yet they're still the world's largest user of carbon. And I see kids, I call them kids because they're in their 20s, and I'm meeting with PhDs in their 20s, and they're driving Audis, and I see electric cars that China's producing. The traffic jams are unbelievable. And I'm just thinking, wow, we have a long way to catch up in the United States. And is going pure oil the way to do it?
Not my decision nor yours, first of all. There's a whole bunch of things you said there. The first is that China has done an absolutely spectacular job since done being said to be rich is glorious. The success of the Chinese diaspora suggests that once the Chinese were liberated from excessive government control, that they would do well, and they did. And the predilection to savings and investment is what you're seeing today. The fact that China is an investment-centric rather than a consumption-centric economy, and has an investment-centric tax code. Now let's go to what you said. The official consumption numbers for power is non-carbon generated power, so they're including nuclear as a renewable.
Ah, okay, that changes the equation.
Now, I am not anti-wind and anti-solar or anti-geothermal. I've invested in all of them myself, with greater or lesser degrees of success. The world is going to need more of all kinds of power. It is estimated by the International Energy Agency that world power demand doubles by 2050. That means that the world needs more solar. And guess what? It needs more coal, whether you like it or not. Now, depending on who you ask, the investment in truly alternative energies, non-nuclear alternative energies, has been over 45 years, a number that varies between $6 trillion and $11 trillion, depending on which expert you consult. I realize they can't be right, but that's as close as I can get it. But just for fun, let's use $6 trillion, the conservative number. A $6 trillion investment over 45 years has reduced the market share of fossil fuels worldwide from a high 45 years ago of 83%, all the way down to a low today of 81%. So a $6 trillion investment has reduced the market share of fossil fuels by 2%. Now, it's important to note, if you go back further in history, almost all power was supplied by renewable sources. Campfires. That's not a viable strategy today. So as more adoption of wind technologies and solar technologies, and in particular, distributed storage, which is a scientist's way of saying batteries, takes place, the cost of renewables and their applicability will increase. And I would suspect that we will see peak oil demand. I just don't think we'll see it in my lifetime.
I got to interrupt you there.
Yeah.
When I was a correspondent at Fox, I was in Washington, D.C. This would have been around 2007, 2008 during the great financial collapse. And the experts at Goldman were talking about peak oil. And of course, that was inaccurate. 20 years later, we know they were inaccurate. I bring up oil. By the way, my uncle used to work at Florida Power and Light. Turkey Point was the nuclear power plant. He used to call it Florida Plunder and Loot. Um, but when we talk about oil and investing in oil, we're in the middle of a political possible game changer with what's going on in Iran. Does that impact negatively on oil, or assuming the mullahs are overthrown and there's a revolution, or is that a positive for oil?
In terms of the oil price, I think there are at least two wild cards. I think Russia is a wild card too. I know it doesn't seem like it right now, but probably someday there will be peace between Russia and the Ukraine. And I think that I think that the mullahs are having, pardon my phrase, but a religious moment right now. And whether or not they're deposed, they may become defanged. Uh, it will take a long time to reestablish Russian production and Iranian production, and for that matter, Venezuelan production, uh, and Mexican production. Those countries have eliminated new project investments, and they've greatly reduced sustaining capital investments. Ironically, in the case of Iran and Venezuela, to subsidize politically expedient domestic programs, including subsidizing gasoline costs. It'll take a while to increase production in those places. But I hope we have peace, and I hope those investments take place. All four of those countries, to the extent that they're going to meaningfully increase production, will have to use U.S. or Canadian technology. The cocktails of technology that has caused the United States from going from the largest petroleum importer in the world to being a net petroleum exporter are precisely the same technologies that will be useful in Mexico, Venezuela, Iran, and Russia. So I hope we understand that.
I want to switch to the other issue, which is we have a Federal Reserve meeting coming up at the end of January. All kinds of weird political things we've not experienced, at least in our lifetime. The DOJ lawsuit against Jay Powell. Correct me when I get this wrong, my favorite phrase. When I see that going on, I think someone like you is like, this is a distraction from the reality of the world, because I would describe you, correct me when I get it wrong, that the Federal Reserve doesn't matter anymore because they've lost control of whatever it is they're trying to manipulate. Is that accurate?
They've lost control of the long-term interest rate, I think. They still control the near-term interest rate, and people still believe in them. So if nothing else, they're an important factoid. In the banking business, by the way, I'm regulated by them. And at least in the lower echelons of the Fed, I'm embarrassed to say because I hate government, they're pretty good regulators. I say that they were inefficient and stupid, except they're not. At the top, they're very political. Make no mistake about that. And I would suggest that they're suicidally complicit, but not complicit enough for Mr. Trump. I would urge Mr. Trump to understand that at least if he follows the competition, in 2.5 years, he'll go back to being gainfully employed. And the Department of Justice might have a long memory if they're asked to audit. I note, too, that we haven't audited the Pentagon. We haven't audited the CIA. I think it's very useful that they're conducting random audits through the length and breadth of the U.S. government. I think it's a trend that should be encouraged. What I understand is that they're suggesting that there have been some irregularities in the construction of buildings at the Fed. This is an interesting conjunction of time. Might we audit our efforts in Iraq? Just out of curiosity. You know what I'm saying. Now, listen, I'm wholly in favor of this. I have no use for Democrats. I have no use for Republicans. I have a lot of use for sideshows. And to the extent that they spend all of their time persecuting each other, pardon me, they have less time to focus on me, which I think is a very good thing. But I don't think that my views are held by most of Americans. And I wish that Americans would come to the point of view that irrespective of their policy outcome, that we have a set of protocols and procedures in the U.S. called the Constitution that's worked reasonably well for a couple hundred years, irrespective of the near-term outcomes. And the fact that we are increasingly ignoring the Constitution, in particular the Bill of Rights, that bothers an old man.
No, I hear you loud and clear. I think, as I've gone through my life, and I am the very boring classic case of the young man who's liberal who becomes far more conservative as they get older because I had to pay taxes and I worked. And I witness things with the younger generation in my family where they are open to the suggestions. I'm going to go to New York City, my home city. I'm blown away by what I'm witnessing. And I heard, I forget who it was who said this on the Bill Maher show, but that it's great that they've elected, and Mamdani and his administration are communist. They're not socialist. You read the DSA platform, that's fine. The only way the people of New York will learn is to experience it. The problem is being in the last third of this existence on this planet, God willing. I'm not sure I get to see the outcome of the education. And it worries me. I mean, Mamdani's was just at a big event at a building in New York City highlighting landlord violations. And it turned out it was a publicly owned building that had been tested as the case for these public owned buildings that'll be panaceas for people who need affordable housing. And the tenants all say it was better when it was privately owned. How do we avoid the disaster that's coming for New York?
We don't. This is not a perfect world. You're a journalist, so you'll understand better than most the wonderful H.L. Mencken quote. The voters usually get what they want, often good and hard. And I think New York gets to experience this. And the fact that it's such a hub of journalism, but in fact, such a hub of great journalism. I mean, both good and bad. And I think we're going to see the outcome of this experiment. Whether or not we see the cure, I think we're going to see real outcomes of this experiment quickly, within 5 years. Talent is mobile. Capital is mobile. I saw a meme the other day nominating Mamdani for Realtor of the Year in Florida. There are a lot of people who are New Yorkers culturally who've left. I was a California culturally, and I left because the California that I was part of doesn't exist anymore.
Mm-hmm.
At another point in time in my life, I lived in Canada happily, and I had intended to make most of my life in Canada because I'm in extractive industries. What the Canadians said politically was Yankee go home. So I did. And I think Mamdani gets to experience this. The people who are really eager to share other people's money are people who don't have any. There's a wonderful meme, too, about that person who will give you the shirt off his back normally doesn't have one. Or as Margaret Thatcher said, pretty soon you run out of other people's money. All of these things are going to come true in real time. Mr. Mamdani's supporters really like this word free. Ain't no free.
No free lunch.
And if you take away the capabilities that people have to pay, the ability to give away that which you no longer have goes away. Mr. Mamdani and New York voters should just ask themselves, how many people flee from North Korea to South Korea? How many leaky boats depart from Miami trying to get Havana? Was the Berlin Wall built to keep the West Berliners out of the East? Was the East defending no property rights? I mean, this is all really, really, really simple stuff. And we get to see it. In my particular case, living in rural Washington, I get to see it the way I want, from a distance on a broad screen TV.
Seattle, California, the wealth tax proposal in California. How do you respond to someone like, and you've already said you can't pronounce NVIDIA, but Jensen Huang, who said, yeah, go ahead, tax, the wealth tax. But then you get Sergey Brin, or the Google founders who are going to Florida. What I know that wealth taxes enacted in Europe have failed, and yet we're about to do it looks like, in California. Then what do you say?
Here in Washington, an income tax requires a constitutional amendment. And the last poll was that 80% of Washingtonians opposed the imposition of an income tax. So what the governor is proposing to do is an excise tax on incomes above $1 million. I mean,
it's an income tax.
I have to say that the creativity of these scoundrels is astonishing. I would say I wouldn't say the naivete. I would say the naivete of the voter and the cynicism of the elected official, the continued resolution towards the politics of envy are, if I wasn't the source of that envy, I would say wholly amusing.
You brought up, and I appreciate your calling me a journalist. I love the profession that I've been a part of since I'm 17, but I've also seen the faults in journalism. And I left linear media, traditional media, many years ago. The one thing that was eye-opening for me, and I'm probably guilty of it if you go back and look at the stuff I used to report on, it's not the reporting of facts, it's storytelling. And in storytelling, there has to be a good guy and a bad guy. And so now when I'm consuming traditional media, which young people don't, they go to social media, which has its own problems, I'm seeing that far more. And I just wonder, economically, because I have skin in this game as I approach those years where I need to live off of the investments, if the storytelling is creating a narrative that is having people vote with consequences that are not ideal, how do we rectify that?
I think social media. I think the fact that social media has all those challenges is one thing, but it's a market. I think you're on social media for, among other reasons, the fact that you've become your editor. That a story that's important to you, being told in a way that's consistent with your values, is important to you. Having a story that's important for you to tell and telling it in a way that's consistent with your values, I suspect when you were in conventional media, caused you a bit of trauma. I suspect that you had some stories that you were not allowed to tell. And I suspect that you, in your storytelling, identified some bad guys that your editors preferred not to have characterized as bad guys. I suspect, too, that you identified some good guys, and identifying them as good guys to a constituency who didn't want to identify them as good guys caused you to have to misidentify some good guys as bad guys and some bad guys as good guys. And I would suspect that you don't have to do that anymore.
I don't.
I existed in a very regulated atmosphere when I was at Sprott. We were, first of all, regulated in many ways, shapes, and forms by government. And you don't want to say my regulator is an effing what. In addition to which, various government entities probably had $1 billion under management by us. And you wouldn't want to talk about the exchequer as a fool when the exchequer is your largest client. I'm largely freed from that now, although I am regulated as a bank shareholder. I can take that. So I understand perfectly, I think, the progression that's happened in your career, where in your media company, you are the employees, you are the shareholders, you are the editors. And that's why I'm attracted for all the noise, all the misinformation, all the idiocy. That's why I'm attracted to social media. As my friend Deg Casey says, 100,000 points of light, not all of which are muzzle flashes.
I want to get back to California and that wealth tax. What would you say to the CEO of NVIDIA who says, go ahead, tax me?
Listen, to the extent the guy wants to pay more tax, more power to him. I'm happy for him to pay tax. I don't believe I have any call on his means, but I don't believe he has any call on my means either. He can volunteer to do whatever he wants to, jump off the Golden Gate Bridge for all I care. I'm delighted that he feels he's getting his money's worth. I don't believe he has any call on my means. Believing you have a call on the fruits of someone else's labor, or the fruits of the risks that people have taken, is analogous with believing in slavery. The taking of personal wealth is involuntary servitude. To the extent that Mr. Wang feels entitled as a slave owner to the benefits of my labor and my risk, well, you can imagine what I think about that.
Yeah, but what do you say to, look, John Stossels has his own media channel, and I watch some of what he does. He talks about how Bill Gates, for instance, has created enormous wealth for lots of people, providing services that did not exist. And the left side of the argument would say we need to take more of his income because he has extracted, not created. What do you say to the people who would say, look, we all have to pay for roads. We all have to pay for the U.S. military to protect us. We have to pay for the services that our governments and states and cities provide. What do you say to those people who say that those who have higher incomes should pay more?
This is going to make me extremely unpopular with your listeners, which will let me know that I'm doing the right thing. Not in every case, but in most cases, the aggregation of wealth, at least by the first generation, stems from the provision of goods and services that consumers willingly paid for. The aggregation of wealth itself is evidence of a contribution to society. I would argue that Bill Gates was underpaid. I would argue that the utility that he generated for the users of Microsoft products, all of whom acquired that product willingly, we pay tax at gunpoint. All of whom acquired Microsoft products willingly suggests that in the eyes of consumers, the product that they bought was worth more to them than the money that they surrendered to buy it. So the idea that the wealthy should pay again when they paid so much the first time is arithmetically false. To feel differently is to espouse either envy, most probable, or a belief in slavery. You have some slaves that pick cotton better than others, Gates being one of them. Does that mean that you had a right to expect a higher output of stolen goods from them? I think not.
I always think of, in these discussions, that scene in Christmas Carol that they always do when one of the ghosts opens up the Christmas robe and you see want and ignorance, and then the ghost says, but beware ignorance, it's far more dangerous than want. Would you agree with that, or do you think, because we've talked about the politics of envy?
I would suggest that ignorance is the cause of want. I believe that humankind has enough access to resources on Earth and enough creativity that want is an option, and that the cause of want is ignorance and envy. So, yes, I believe in the lesson of the Christmas Carol. I believe in it differently than the way it's taught.
Yeah.
You're in China right
now.
And China is described as a communist or socialist country. If you and I built a factory in China, typical tilt-up concrete construction, we would expense that building against our other income, against tax, in year one. In the United States, we would depreciate that building over 33 years. China has an investment-centric tax code, despite the fact that it's a communist country. It resembles Sweden in that regard. The U.S. has a consumption-centric tax code, despite the fact that we're allegedly a capitalist country. For an investor like me, communist China, as long as I don't criticize the government, which would be a chore, is substantially more free than the United States.
I want to get home at the end of this trip, so I'm not going to talk politics. I suspect they're listening to us right now. But I will tell you, I would take our system any day with its flaws over. And I'm blown away by, look, I was in a city called Xiamen, which is in southern China. Unbelievable, and literally built in the last 30 to 40 years. The skyscrapers were unbelievable and just endless. A friend of mine who is from here said, yeah, but is anyone living in them? And I said, well, in that city, I suspect they are. But back to the United States and what's going to happen with us. How do we, you said earlier that the errors of the last 40 years are not going to be corrected in 5 years. How do we correct? Because it feels to me we still have this spirit of innovation as long as somebody can make $1 billion. I don't know if the Mamdani crowd is going to come into power and end that. But how do we compete against a China, which is ascendant, where we seem to have somewhat stalled?
We could hold our own against China. Well, we could do two things. All those wonderful Chinese students that we make go home because we're racist and anti-competitive, we could keep Jerry Huang among them. But we could make our tax code more investment friendly. That would erase the Chinese structural edge overnight. Now, I don't know if we have the courage to do that because an investment-centric tax code is by its nature anti-progressive, which is to say it's geared towards investment, which is what rich people do, rather than consumption, which is what less rich people do. But I agree with you. The United States still, despite its sins, has a fantastic culture. We are still a place, even in the People's Republic of California, where 4 or 5 or 6 young people can take over a garage and out pops Google or out pops Apple. And I think we continue. I think there's still an ethos in America, an ethos that's under attack, to be sure. In my activities as the director of Students for Liberty, we interacted with 160,000 students worldwide, many in the United States. And when I look at young people, I mean, yes, you get frustrated with some of the things that young people do. But when I put that frustration aside and I compare these 20-year-olds with where I was when I was 20 years old, I become a lot more tolerant.
Well, I will tell you that for all my criticism of Mamdani and the enthusiasm of his followers, I admire the enthusiasm of the 20-year-olds who want change. I don't think they're misguided in their criticism of a system that seems to have become sclerotic in some ways and the need for change. I just disagree with the process of change because I'm old enough to know where that leads as they're executing.
You know, I used to go out on the street during the Occupy Wall Street things and visit with the protesters. That was enormously amusing for me. I didn't usually do it in suit and tie, but I would do it nonetheless. And I would listen to their arguments. And I would say, I think it's important that we get common ground on a couple of very basic human rights, because what you're really talking about is rights. How do you feel about slavery? How do you feel about the involuntary expropriation of the fruits of someone's labor? Are you pro-slave or are you anti-slave? If slavery only takes place for 5 months rather than 12 months, is that okay? And I got a lot of hate, but I got a lot of smiles and a lot of laughs too.
My recollection of Occupy Wall Street, because I covered it for Fox, and I was right there at Zuccotti Park, and I watched, there was a bodega, and the so-called unorganized, spontaneous protest was quite organized. And I witnessed after a week and a half, almost 2 weeks they were there, I witnessed the bodega owner pleading with the unorganized organizer, enough already. He was losing business. And the organizer, the member from the committee, they snapped their fingers a lot, said to this bodega owner, uh, you have to understand there are some causes more important than your business. And that was a real eye opener for me, because I thought the arrogance of this person to say that to a human being who's trying to, earn a living and conduct business. And I just went to, Animal Farm, 4 legs good, 2 legs better. It scared me.
Mr. Mandami should decide what your priorities are. I don't
Correct.
reckon. He degrades you as a human being by doing that. He thinks that the outcome that he desires is somehow more valid or more important than the outcome that you desire. I remember the great Mexican revolutionary Emiliano Zapata, who was misidentified as a communist. And when he was being successful, they came to him and talked about redistribution. And he said, if you try to redistribute my farm, I will shoot you. How clear is that?
Yeah, well, we have the appointed person in the Mamdani administration who wants to, literally has said on record, expropriate and seize private property, which the DSA talks about. I don't want to go there. I just want to ask you as we start to wrap up.
There was a great
talk to people
from a black property owner sitting on his step, and the caption is, "And how white am I?"
Yeah, I saw that. For someone who's 40 years old, an American who believes in investing in capitalism, we've talked about your belief about commodities and the bull markets that we're going to have in commodities. What else should they be looking at as a way to protect their future, if it's possible to protect your future?
They're going to hate the answer themselves. Understand that the next 10 years is going to be much less benign than the last 40. And understand that you're going to have to deliver more utility to sustain your lifestyle than you have in the past. Too many Americans believe that their job is to show up, put in the time, and get paid. Your job is to deliver value. Your job is to deliver a lot more utility for your customer and your boss's customer than you consume for yourself. Showing up doesn't cut it. Generating utility cuts it. The second part of that is that to survive well for the next 10 years, in addition to you working for your money's going to have to work for you. And in order to do that, you're going to have some. So you're going to have to generate more utility than you consume. You're going to have to save. And the third thing that you worry about is investing. The first thing is investing in your primary asset, which is you. The second thing is becoming a capitalist, which requires capital, which requires savings. Too many people today want to live rich as opposed to be rich. I had the extreme good fortune when I was a kid of wanting to be rich, not live rich, which served me well over time. Then I think you need to understand simply that the next 10 years is going to be much more volatile than the last 40 have been. We may experience dramatic volatility like 2008. We may not. But it's going to be much more volatile. And volatility, if you're prepared for, is not a risk. It's just a series of sales, which is better than one sale. And you're going to have to be applied. We're not in a period like 1982 to 2022 where you had declining real interest rates. That's over. So it's arguable that if you have a period where interest rates are stable or rise, that the metrics by which you price securities change, and they change for the worse. But we're also in a period where if you have the ability to understand the impact of technology on utility, that you'll have the ability to outperform your competitors, myself included. I joked earlier in terms of analyzing NVIDIA, I can't spell it. But younger people who are closer to technology, will, I think, have the ability to identify sociological trends that matter to them, technology trends that matter to them. And if they work, I think they'll have the ability to outcompete dinosaurs like me. I won't suffer because I've learned valuation skill sets in extractive industries, in other resources industries, and in conventional financial services. So I'll do fine. It's the people who have no skill sets whatsoever. They're going to have the roughest time. And people on a fixed income. I mean, I really, really, really feel sorry for the entitlements beneficiaries. Most of them, and I talked to a lot of them, believe that since they paid into the thing for 50 or, in my case, 60 years, that they're going to get out. But they aren't. The net present value of unfunded entitlements in the United States exceeds $120 trillion. And it is not going to sustain people to the standard that they believe it will. It's simply not. That's arithmetic. It isn't Republican, it isn't Democrat, it isn't right, it isn't left. Somebody who believes that the rate of inflation in the future will resemble the rate of inflation in the period 1982 to 2022, got another thing coming. It's going to be an ugly thing. If I'm right, and I'm pretty sure I am, it's going to take $4,000 in 2035 to support what $1,000 in 2025 bought. And if your savings and your income, your pension, your entitlement, whatever, isn't sufficient to fund the gap, you're going to be in a world of hurt.
On that cheery note, is there anything you want to add as I get ready for the Titanic to slip under?
Well, Ayn Rand once said, I think it was in 1981 at the New Orleans Investment Conference, she was asked in her speech, what of the poor? And she says, well, first of all, don't be one. Don't compete with them. The outcome, the only possible outcome is up to you. I'm firmly of a belief that penury, want, is optional. And the only person who can make the choice really is you. There will be people, unfortunately, who don't have the ability to deal with that. There always have been, there always will be. But the people who take the time to listen to your podcast are not amongst them. They may prefer to leave responsibility for their future to others. It's more convenient, but it's much more dangerous than it has been in the past. And beyond that, if you have the capability, you need to know that you don't just have to look after yourself. You have to look after your friends. You have to look after your family to the extent you can. You have to look after your community. Because other people might not have the range of talents that you have. They might not have the luck that you enjoy. So if you have the ability, not through government, not involuntarily, but if you see a need that you're able to fill and you have the ability to fill it, it's a good thing to be able to do so. So your responsibility and your opportunity is, for better or for worse, much greater than you believe it is.
Rick Rule, thank you very much.